thank you all for joining us today. This is going to be a great panel. We're kicking it off here in this room, and it's, as Jennifer said, sometimes the best things in life are free, how the open internet court decision could impact free data services. And today we're going to talk about the effect of the recent DC Circuit Court of Appeals decision on the wireless industry's innovative free data services. And I'd like to introduce our panelists. To my left, we have Doug Brake. He is Telecommunications Policy Analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Next to Doug, we have Brent Olson, who is Vice President, Global Public Policy at AT&T. And next to Brent, we have Katie Saunders, Associate General Counsel at Verizon. And last but not least, we have John Wilkins, who's the Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission. All right, thanks everybody. Let's get started. So a little icebreaker to start it off. A lot of the discussion around free data services involves consumer use of video. And with mobile video usage continuing to climb, in fact, Cisco reported that video accounted for 61% of mobile data consumption last year. Let's go down the line and let me ask you about how do you consume video over mobile? So what's your go-to way to watch mobile video?
Oh man, it's an interesting question. So I don't know that there's any one particular way that I consume mobile video. I think it's just sort of like, randomly come across a link to some YouTube video or something like that. And so it'd be nice with free data to be able to click on those links without having to worry about, what sort of data rate this video is going to be at, clicking on mystery links throughout the internet.
So, of course, my go-to way is to use the DirecTV app. But if I'm being honest, my go-to way is over the shoulder of my daughters when they're showing me a YouTube video or showing me a video that their friend doing something stupid took. That's usually the
on
most
Snapchat.
video. Yeah, exactly.
It's funny, like a lot of us, I grew up watching video on TV, and the bigger the TV, the better. We all had this ginormous TV that you'd go to, particularly to watch sports. And I was sort of struck by that this weekend. Friends and I were talking about the US Open, and we didn't go to the TV. We pulled out my phone, we got to Fios Mobile, and we live streamed it. And it's kind of cool that all of a sudden you can watch the US Open on a screen about like this. You can see the ball, you can follow what's going on. And I realized that that's how I'm consuming video these days. Between Go 90, and then of course, a lot of videos of my daughter that get texted to me by her dad.
Very nice.
So as the parent of two teenagers, my goal in life is to reduce the amount of mobile video consumed in my house. I don't mind paying for it. It's just I never see them without it in front of their faces. Personally, easy. MLB.com. I'm a baseball fan. See the highlights of the Washington Nationals, or when you're out of DC like we are and you can't get it in the local market. So it's easy for me personally.
Very nice, very nice. So let's get into a little bit about what is driving mobile providers to offer free data services today. So I'll turn it over to Brent and Katie to talk about, in terms of customer service and competition and innovation, can you talk to us about what free data services mean to your companies and consumers, and tell us a little bit about the free data services that your companies offer today.
Yeah, so our main product or platform in the free data area is sponsored data, and AT&T was a bit of a trailblazer in this space. Over 2 years ago, in fact about 2.5 years ago, we announced the sponsored data platform, and what that is a platform. It's a billing platform, first of all, so it's not something that prioritizes or optimizes the traffic. It's something that allows third parties to essentially pay for the data consumption of an end user. So, and there's been a variety of providers who have taken advantage of the platform. We've had folks like Slate, who's done it experimented with it for podcasts. Other companies like Toyota, who's used it for providing car videos and things like that. And they've seen with their own data has shown that they get more uptick in terms of starting videos or finishing videos or actually engaging with the link that they want the customer to use. And the way the platform works is, like I said, it's a billing platform that allows a third party to use an AT&T API that allows them to build into their website or an application or service that API into that application. And so when a customer of AT&T goes to that, let's say that website, it will say, hey, you can watch this video, let's say this Toyota video, and it won't count against your data allowance. Would you like to do it? And it's all transparent and says sponsored, AT&T sponsored data. And then the customer engages with the application. Then they'll see on their monthly bill that, hey, you consumed X amount of data that was free and sponsored by these companies. And we've seen a lot of different, like I said, a lot of different uses of it. I think one thing I would mention that got announced today was that one more use of that platform will be by DirecTV. We just announced that we're putting out a new DirecTV app that has a lot of cool things associated with it. It's really taking the TV everywhere concept to the next level, where you're actually going to be able to watch your watch your content where you want it, when you want it, over the AT&T mobile network. And as part of the benefit, part of that product, DirecTV will be using the sponsored data platform, so that data, when a customer uses it, will be free data.
Fantastic. Katie?
Thanks. So we see free data as an avenue for a new way for sponsors to engage with their customers, and for customers to get access to something that perhaps they hadn't seen before or hadn't wanted to try. So we have a program called Freebie. We've got a bunch of different flavors of it: Freebie 360 and Freebie Data and Freebie Perks. And this is an offering whereby sponsors can reach out and sponsor data in a variety of different ways that meets their needs. So for example, a sponsor can cover all the data costs associated with the download of an app. They could also cover a 30-second video commercial or a movie trailer. Or they could cover something a bit longer, like say a 30-minute audio presentation. The other thing that they could do is cover all the data associated with the usage on a particular website. So there's a lot of different options for a provider at both big and small, and depending at what level they want to become engaged, but it allows them to differentiate their offering, to a specific customer or a specific market that they want to reach.
Thank you. John, can you tell us a little bit about the FCC's perspective here and the framework that you use in looking at these new free data services?
Sure. Well, one of the beauties of the open internet rules is they really do provide a very clear framework. And so we start with the text of the order. Question 1, are any of the bright line rules implicated? Question 2, is it a general conduct sort of question? And then third, the transparency rules, which a separate category, but a very important fundamental category. We assess any issues there. As you get in the general conduct rule, it is that case-by-case balancing test. The order sets out specifically a number of factors to be looked at, the degree to which consumer choice is supported, impacts on competition and innovation. And the last thing I'll say is, as we started to look at a lot of the activity in the market, I think that the beauty of that case-by-case approach is it does give us that degree of flexibility to understand what's going on, to talk to companies, and to try to make the best judgments. But just to give you one fact that we've in the wireless group been looking at, just since the end of last year, just the sort of zero rating-ish, and there's obviously lots of flavors, mobile plans from the 4 main carriers announced since the end of last year, depending on how you count, there have been sort of 12 to 18 changes in those plans just since the end of last year. And to me, that's a very good indicator of why it's important that we do have that kind of case-by-case flexibility to just look at things as they come, understand them. And there's no points for speed. And we want to just understand what's going on as well as we can against that framework.
Thanks, John. And Doug, how, in your opinion, does competition in this wireless industry drive innovation and spur providers to offer these types of new services? Sure,
competition. So we at ITIF, when we talk about competition and innovation, think of the sort of ideal level of competition to drive innovation is looks something like an inverted U, right? Where it's like you don't want a monopoly and things become just static, but you have too many competitors then you fragmented revenue base. You can't invest in building new technology, developing new products and services. And it seems to me that in the U.S. with four major providers, we're somewhere near that sweet spot at the top, getting a tremendous amount of innovation, new products, new pricing models, and I think zero rating data, free data is a good example of that.
Thanks, Doug. Let's talk a little bit about the new regulatory landscape before us. So everyone knows in June, the D.C. Circuit upheld the Commission's 2015 Open Internet Order, and that, as John mentioned, included bright line rules and a broad general conduct standard. And in July, a number of parties, including CTIA, filed for review of that decision. John, can you tell us, in the meantime, as this rolls through the courts, how can the FCC promote innovation and new pro-consumer services?
And right, just to clarify, certainly the Commission is going to engage the D.C. Circuit on those appeals, and we'll respond to any court action. But we're not sort of holding in abeyance anything until anything else comes from the D.C. Circuit. Look, I think for us, the open internet rules, they're incredibly important, but they're just one tool, right? And the chairman in his keynote this morning, I'll just quote him directly. That's always very safe terrain for these sort of panels. Just quote the chairman. The goal is to promote and protect competition, and the open internet rules are very important for that. But we have many other tools. So I think on the open internet front, I mean, I guess the other thing I'd say from the previous question, there is a lot of work going on across many parts of the Commission, the various bureaus, to really understand how best we apply those rules. And unlike a lot of other areas of Commission rules where you've got professionals of the Commission that have sort of administered the same set of rules for a long time and have sort of incredible institutional memory, open internet rules are pretty new, right? And so we're figuring out just how will they be applied in practice, and there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on that. And all the other tools in our toolkit to advance competition apply, right? So spectrum policy, we can, at the end, I think if there's a question or two around advice for the next administration, I'll probably talk mostly about spectrum policy and how else we should continue to lean in on that. But, it's an all of the above, and again, the chairman couldn't be clearer. Protect and promote competition, and, any tools we have, we're gonna use to do that.
Thanks, John. Brent and Katie, in your opinion, how does this open internet order factor into decisions that your companies make about offering consumer services like free data?
Sure. So, as a starting point, I think it's important to note that, before the D.C. Circuit decision came down, we've come out publicly in favor of the open internet. We've supported the bright line rules, the no blocking, no throttling, no paid prioritization, and we continue to stand behind that. So to that extent, the fact that the order came down doesn't change a whole lot. Those rules are in effect, as John said, and we're continuing to abide by that and to pay very close attention when we roll out an offering and when we look and evaluate new opportunities. We want to make sure we're in accordance with what the FCC has said here. We think the Freebie program does that, particularly because it is non-discriminatory and it's open to all comers, no matter what their size, what their option, it's the same rates and terms.
Yeah, so, first thing I'd say is AT&T, like CTIA, is filed for a petition for rehearing on the rules with the D.C. Circuit. So we obviously have some issues with the rules, and certainly, our main issue was started with the classification decision, the decision to reclassify broadband as Title II, but without going down that path and sticking to the question as to how do we factor it in when we're talking about free data services. I mean, first answer is obviously you have to factor it in and try to anticipate whether these things are implicated or not. I think the good news about free data, at least what I would say, is competition is, I know, Chairman Wheeler's mantra. In fact, competition, competition, competition is Chairman Wheeler's mantra. And I think these services are clearly the result of competition in the market. They're clearly the result, and they clearly give customers choice. We have our own plan. Verizon has a different plan. T-Mobile has a different plan. Sprint has their own plan. You see commercials every night when you're watching TV about those plans. Obviously, it's a very hyper-competitive market, and consumers have choices here. And I think that is something that is overlaying the FCC rules, the open internet rules. And so I think, we feel confident and comfortable that these products, our sponsored data product, is consistent with the open internet rules.
Thanks. And Doug, how do you see the order affecting innovation and competitive decisions?
Sure thing. So we're talking about open internet order. I think it's really important, like Brent did, to abstract out the decision to classify broadband as Title II telecommunication service from the actual substance of the sort of net neutrality rules. And so Title II, to my mind, when you're talking about competitive markets, I don't see many redeeming qualities. It was clearly necessary to make the rules that the FCC wanted to make. But the actual jurisdictional framework of Title II, I think you can set aside from the actual question of the net neutrality framework. So I don't know, to say something nice about the framework, I agree with John. I think it's a well thought out framework in that you need some sort of bright line rules to give some clarity, and you need some adaptability, something like the general conduct standard. I think the real problem is that the FCC ended up drawing that line in the wrong place. It went too far. We at ITIF have argued that there are some applications that would really benefit by some form of prioritization. And so we would have liked to have seen rules that allowed for some sort of paid prioritization, but then put on top of that something like the general conduct standard to take a sort of more antitrust case-by-case approach to analyzing those. And so to my mind, these sort of free data services, as long as they're offered on a sort of open, non-exclusive basis, are very clearly in the public interest and fall far to the line of the general conduct standard and should be freely allowed. Yeah, so I think the open internet, the problem is with the open internet order and the net neutrality rules is that as it stands, they fall in this sort of squishy gray area where nobody's really quite sure how the FCC is going to come out on the various programs as proposed, and so we're in this sort of area of great uncertainty. It would be good to get some clarity, and I think allow all these programs to go forward. Yeah.
Thanks. So that gets to what steps the FCC could do now to encourage these types of offerings. And you think just offer some clarity? Is that
right? I think clarity is key. Yeah, absolutely. And to my mind, it can be really simple in the form of as long as these are non-exclusive, as long as these are relatively open programs where carriers make efforts to encourage everyone to participate. That these aren't sort of exclusive deals of a carrier working with one particular edge provider or something like that. That would obviously be problematic. But otherwise, to my mind, is if the FCC would come out and just say, if these are non-exclusive, then these are generally pro-consumer, pro-innovation. These are good offerings. That form of clarity would help an awful lot.
Great. John, you have any response to that, or you're good?
Well, let's see. I mean, pretty much everybody talked about the issue of openness, non-exclusivity as an important factor. Oh, sorry. I'm used to the wireless.
I know.
Wireless bureau, wireless mic.
Yeah.
So everyone made that point. So as we think about the different factors that apply, absolutely, right? Offers that have a fundamental characteristic that they are about, open to anyone, not about exclusivity, certainly is a positive factor. And I think on the last point around providing more guidance and clarity, I think we understand that. I think you should be looking to different parts of the commission in the time ahead to try to respond to that. But I just want to always go back to, we take very seriously, again, I'll quote the chairman, right? The light touch regulatory model that I really do think is what we are intending to do, even in a Title II regime. And that's not consistent with just, at the first instance flying out with, here's exactly how it's all going to play out, because we know this is a very fluid market. And I want to emphasize, there's a lot of work at the commission going on now at all levels to really understand as well as we can what's really happening and how can we respond to what I think, is a legitimate question about what kind of guidance can be out there, even in a general conduct rule that by definition is case by case.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about free data's impact on affordability. So some edge providers have argued that free data services enable them to reach low-income customers that might not be able to afford their services, particularly as they look to sign up subscribers internationally. Do you see a role for free data services in lowering affordability barriers? And John or Doug or both of you? One of you.
I'll let Doug
All right, yeah, sure. I do think this issue of affordability, especially when you start looking abroad, because zero rating and free data programs are not unique to the United States. They're pretty common internationally, especially in sort of developing countries where cost of data is even more extreme as compared to people's incomes. And so I think it really reveals a lot about this debate when, for example, you look at Wikipedia has a offering where they will zero rate a form of Wikipedia that sort of lowers resolution of images and is less intensive on bandwidth, similar to video we have in the United States. And even Wikipedia, they faced some criticism saying that this was supposedly a net neutrality violation. And even Wikipedia itself was like, well, we take these steps to ensure that it's transparent, that customers understand it. And they were really, it seemed to me, very defensive about this offering. And so it's really kind of amazing when we want to put the pedal all the way down in favor of free, lowest barriers to entry for a new encyclopedia to come along, and that works against offering free information to some of the poorest people in the world. So when that's the principle that you're standing on, and you want to impede offering information more broadly to people who could really benefit from it, I think that should cause you to step back and say, maybe just standing on this principle as a hard line is something that we should be evaluating. And so I absolutely think that the same thinking translates to the way these programs are deployed in the United States. Here the bandwidth concern is a little bit different, the pricing is a little bit different, and so here we're talking more about zero rating mobile video rather than basic access to information like Wikipedia, but the same idea applies. All sorts of government services, a variety of different options could, in theory, be offered for free through these sorts of platforms, and at the same time, entertainment and video, things like that. Low-income users, deserve an option to be able to access that in the same way. So yeah, I think it's really revealing that the debate is so principled on the sort of net neutrality activist side. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Sure. So. Again, this is one of the devil's in the details, right? And so I think just as other countries, there have been concern raised about versions of these plans, and I think as the U.S. regulator, we're not going to sort of just poo-poo that, and we'll want to understand as well as we can exactly what the aspects of any given plan is. I think also this is a topic where I could just say a couple words about how we see the role of economics in these kind of questions. So, first principles. Sure. I mean, microeconomics applies here. So yeah, is charging a customer less a good thing as a first question? Sure, and absolutely. I mean, the increasing access to people for whom affordability is a real driver of digital divide concerns? Absolutely, right? And so that first order question on a static basis is free better than not free for the consumer? Yes. I think though, it's incumbent on us, especially given the economics of this industry, right? The impact of scale and network effects and the dynamic effect that can have on kind of forward-looking innovation, forward-looking competition. The chairman this morning talked about competitive structure. We have to bring that dynamic view in too. And I think that's another example of what we're really trying to dig into deeper in the commission is as we assess these sorts of offers. First question, is free better for the consumer? Of course it is. On the other hand, like I'll sort of make in a different context, but the analogy applies. In the Lifeline reform context this year, the chairman, Commissioner Kleiber, and others, talked a lot about just because you're crossing the digital divide with an offer, it really shouldn't be second-class service, and that doesn't mean it should be the fastest, best service that anybody pays for. But it probably shouldn't come with so many strings attached that you really are sacrificing important things around openness or innovation, and that's the kind of thing you want to look at for these offers. But absolutely, starting point is free, good to help people that can't afford to get access as a starting point, sure.
Great, thanks. Let's talk about data allowances for a minute. So for all the free data proponents out there, there are some advocates that argue that free data services would not even be necessary if carriers did not offer plans with data caps. John, can you share with everybody the Open Internet Order's approach to data caps and should we be thinking about data caps like we think about other usage-based offerings?
Sure. Well, so this is another area where a nice thing about the order is it addresses it directly, right? And it says data caps should be considered in the general conduct rule context. And to your second question, I think as we look at it, yeah, a data cap is obviously it's an important element, but it is one element of what can be a very complex, pricing offer package that a provider develops. And the effect that that element in the overall package has on the things that we care about, consumer welfare, competition, really just depends on where it's set. So again, I think that the wisdom of the rule saying that's not one where a bright line rule makes any sense at all, I think is clearly been borne out. And I guess the last quick point, it's interesting. Again, I don't always want to come back to the 4 big providers, but the 4 big providers are a nice touchstone as to where things seem to be going. There's an interesting kind of trend right now, which is a couple of providers are moving away from data caps at all, others aren't. And I think, again, that kind of dynamism in the market is what we're just trying to stay abreast of and figure out how to apply the frameworks best as we can.
Thanks. And to the rest of you, what do you see as the relationship between free data plans and data caps? Go down the line if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to my mind, it's like data caps are a sort of one sort of model that we need to help allocate scarce resources. The fact of the matter is, mobile capacity is limited, spectrum is scarce, spectrum is expensive, and building out small cells is incredibly expensive. And so this is a way for operators to price a scarce resource to better meet demand. And I think it's as simple as that. When you have a competitive market, figuring out there's going to be a wild variety of pricing structures, but these tools are incredibly important. And so to say that there's no need for data caps or something like that, I think is a little bit silly. Obviously, some operators have found a way to operate with unlimited plans, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out with mobile video. For instance, the recent T-Mobile offering where you have to pay additional for HD video, otherwise it is limited to 480p. I think that is a great solution, right? People get more entertainment, more video per dollar of their data, and so this is a one method of sort of allocating the scarce resources to give consumers more of what they want. I think it's really as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, Doug laid out the economic equation, and it's not that complicated. I mean, one thing I would maybe quibble with is I always thought the term data cap is problematic because it really isn't the right term for what's going on. This is a pricing mechanism, and as Doug said, it's a way to price a resource that ultimately is scarce, and you're trying to allocate a number among a lot of users now who are using it more and more, and so so it's just one way to do it, and there's no magic way. But what's happening, what you'll see if you do a time scan of what's happened over time in the wireless market in terms of pricing, it's changed a lot. That's good. It's trying to, and that's because we've been responding to consumers' demand and their needs, and trying to figure out more ways to make the plans fit different consumer behaviors. That's what's going on. So data cap sounds negative, and that's why I react to it negatively. It's not the right term for what's going on. It's just one way to price the scarce resource. If you think about it that way, I think it's not then inherently demonized. It becomes just something to talk about. There's in terms of, okay, what are the other ways? Another thing I'd talk about, getting back to the previous question, when you talk about free data and how it can benefit low income, I think one thing I'd say is it can also really benefit app providers and users of the network. Because this isn't rocket science. It's not a secret. There's been products out there that people have used before, like 800 service. Or free shipping. Amazon uses that, which has helped trigger tremendous demand for services. And what it ends up doing is it draws lines between consumers and vendors, or consumers and suppliers. And in many ways, if you go back to our sponsored data product, a lot of the folks we've seen come that want to use it are not the big companies. The ones that I think the folks on the other side, or the other side of the debate, that worry about these things, think that it is going to happen. It's only going to be the big companies use it. The reality is there's all kinds of upstarts that want to use it. They want to make a business out of it, and they're using it as a way to get their application found. Because I think Glenn Lurie, who gave a keynote this morning for AT&T, and one thing he said, I think, is there's over 5 million apps today. Over 5 million. So obviously, just being on iTunes or Android App Store is not going to be the only way that you're going to get found. You need to find creative ways to be able to get your app out there. And things like making it available for free or using it for free are going to help encourage utilization and help people find that app. So I think that's one thing that gets lost in this debate, and people should think about when they think about what are all the benefits that can come along with it.
Thanks.
I think that Brent hit on a lot of the points here that are really important, that these are, free data is one of a variety of ways of differentiating and offering for a provider at a bunch of different levels. And the barrier to entry for some providers may be a lot less than, say, doing a conventional marketing campaign. For example, if you are a developer of a new app, perhaps to bring services to somebody in the inner city, it's going to be very expensive for you to go into the city and build billboards or put ads on the sides of buses, but you might be able to target a free data offering, to a community or to folks who might be interested in that with something that might be exactly what they're looking for in that app. And I think that that's something that gets a little lost sometimes in the conversation. I think Brent touched on very well the point as well that when we talk about data plans, what we're talking about is right-sizing an offering for what a customer needs. My mom, who uses maybe 300 megs a month on a good month, she doesn't need to be subsidizing somebody who's burning through 12 gigs every month. But for her, there's a plan that works really well for her, and that fits her needs. And that's just one of the advantages of that type of structure. There's a lot of other structures as well.
Thanks, Katie.
Chris, can I just add one quick thing? I wanted to agree with Doug's point about, mobile networks clearly have a different cost structure than wireline networks. And, as we talk about at the FCC, the Wireless Bureau and the Wireline Bureau, and on some of these areas, we're trying to be very consistent. Mobile is different, and I think, we absolutely factor that in as we look at things. Just on the data cap, or again, I don't disagree that calling it a cap maybe isn't exactly the right term, but on that issue, I think a lot of the points that were made, I think we would agree with, to the extent, can a data cap, or whatever we want to call it, have a very pro-consumer role in an offer? Absolutely. But I think those examples also highlight where our case-by-case analysis could say it wouldn't have the same effect, right? And so we can easily imagine the other versions of these plans where, a data cap that was set really low, except for if you used your own content, to get zero rate. I mean, those are the kind of offers that go to the dynamic analysis we were talking about. So those, I think that there are two sides to this, but the positive versions of a lot of these offers, certainly are very valid.
Great. Let's talk about the relationship of free data services for the edge providers out there. So, Doug, how do you respond to critics who worry that free data plans will harm small edge providers?
Yeah, I think Brent touched on this nicely. I think a lot of the concern on the other side, as Brent said, is the fear that these free data services will only be taken advantage by the large edge providers and they'll sort of reify their market power or whatever. And it seems like the early introduction of a lot of these services, that simply hasn't been the case, that there's been a lot of use by small app providers. And this, I think, not just to get sort of the app notice, right? Because it seems to me with app stores, there's a real problem with sort of search and finding new applications. When you have a list of, 10,000 applications or whatever, it's hard to find a new one that you actually like. And so this is an opportunity for small startup edge providers to get their app noticed. But it's also, I think, incredibly important. It's a way for them to start building those network effects, right? Once you start getting the sort of flywheel spinning of popularity and more people talking about your app more and more, then it can really take off quickly, right? We've seen how quickly apps can take off with adoption. And so with free rating or zero rating free data services, that reduces one sort of potential point of friction for someone downloading an application. Instead of waiting to go home and download it on Wi-Fi or something like that, then you can just download it whenever. And so this is an opportunity for edge providers to really get their product out there. And that seems to be what the early evidence from a lot of the experimentation that's been going on here and abroad. There's been some studies from some academics in Europe that have looked at comparing countries countries that have a ban on free data services to those that allow these to flourish, and they've seen no tipping to large edge providers in the countries that have them available, and so that seems to be a pretty effective way for small edge providers. And yeah, I mean, I think the assumption is fair. If you have a good idea and you have the capital to get it in front of people, this is an excellent model to do so.
Just to give an example that I think builds on what Doug's talking about at some level, a couple of providers that have been using our sponsored data platform might be companies you've never heard of. Kudo and DataMe are two of them. And what's interesting is they're basically becoming a platform on top of a platform, in the sense that they're using our sponsored data platform to build their own platform. And what they're doing is trying to be a platform to find either other applications, or to another way you can use our platform is through basically like a reward system. So you can actually, let's say, use an app or a service and have it not count against your data, or you can use it to earn data credits that you could then apply against your monthly bill. And so what you're seeing is this kind of it's burgeoning. This is not mature like the App Store or what have you, but they're trying to become a platform. It's not just the use of, hey, I'm an app provider, or I'm a company out there who wants to sponsor my content. There's all these uses out there that you might not have anticipated. I think that's a good hallmark of what's going on in this industry, which is these things mushroom and they spur off all these things that we didn't anticipate, and that is definitely a hallmark of a competitive market providing consumer choice. And I think, again, proof that the light touch is the right touch for this place, because who knows what's going to happen next, but it's all happening because it's responding to the customer demand out there, and it's responding to app provider demand.
Brent, you covered this a little bit, but Katie, I'll ask you, how has Verizon provided edge providers, emerging edge providers, with the opportunities to succeed in this market?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about our Freebie program and both Freebie Perks, which is similar to what Brent was just talking about as an opportunity for sponsors to actually provide data credit. If they're interested in being involved in that, they can provide data credit for a sponsor for a user who wants to click on an app or engage in some particular way. That's got a fairly low barrier to entry, so that an edge provider could get involved in that program. They could also get involved in something as small as, I'd like to sponsor a 30-second video, which is a pretty small amount of data, and they could just say, I want to be able to sponsor that, so that as Doug and Brent were both talking about, a new provider coming into the market could say, I'm going to use this as a way to differentiate my service and a way to get some attention and to encourage people to hear about it and access that content right away instead of waiting. And I think that's a really important point that Doug brought up, that removing the time that it takes for somebody to go home and think about it and walk the dog and do all the other things you have to do when you go home before you say, oh, maybe I'm going to click on that content. This instead is an option for a customer to say, hey, there's no cost to me to do it right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh.
Can I wrote a paper on this and trying to remember all the points that we made. But I think one real important point that I forgot. It seems like all of the programs that have been introduced in the United States allow for the sort of edge providers to participate on the platform on a very granular level, right? So we're not talking like a huge capital investment to participate. They can pay, sort of as they go to try to get that network effect built up at the very beginning. And so my understanding is it's very granular and can start at a very low level. And so this isn't like something that's just for big players. I think it's a really important point that is lost in the discussion a lot. But I think it's important and worth noting that it's like the concerns about open internet are not just about like services reaching customers, right? There's a free speech aspect to the internet. People want a great diversity of different viewpoints and have all of those be accessible, right? And so even with that, if you have some random website run by somebody out of their garage who's not even trying to make a startup, but it just has some blog and they want to say something, it's like even with that free data services, this allows you to potentially zero rate all of your video offerings, and so you don't burn through your data plan or cap, however you want to frame it, and just opens up more data for a monthly plan for you to explore other offerings like that. And so I think, to my mind, it's like it works both ways. It allows, even if you don't participate in zero rating program, this is probably a good thing to allow people to continue to discover all the wonderful weird stuff out on the internet.
Good point. Good point. John, do you see any lessons from the explosion of the app economy since 2008 that should be applied here to these emerging free data services?
Well, I think it's, it's another one of these case studies of why a generally light touch approach to protecting a very open competitive environment is a good thing. We would all agree that none of us could have sat here in 2006 and predicted the size and scale, or let alone which apps were going to be so successful. So I think that's the macro point. I think we view the 2008 explosion in the app economy as just another one of these great examples of how it's foolish to try to predict exactly how these things play out. A light touch approach that emphasizes openness and competition is the way to go. I think on a more specific level, vis-a-vis the free aspect, I think it is interesting to observe that. I know there's some apps you pay to download, but certainly the free download app is sort of the dominant model for the reasons that folks have talked about, right? You're better off as an app developer to rapidly get scale for your app, and then you create value from that. And I think that goes back to the point that I made a minute ago about the static versus dynamic analysis. And I think the explosion of the app economy, it really proves that in this space, the economics, whether it's the value creation for the companies or the welfare to the consumer, the first question is, well, what am I paying right now? But in some ways, the bigger question is what other value is created in all the things the network does for me. And I think we just want to bring that same kind of holistic view to all the new things that we also can't predict sitting here today that are, going to be referenced back to future panels like this as who would have thought in 2016, this or that would have happened.
Thank you. So let's talk about giving advice to the next administration, whether Hillary or Donald make it into the White House. As we look to the next administration and setting aside this free data issue for a minute, what, in your opinions, is another key policy initiative that can help spur the wireless industry's continued leadership in mobile broadband? Start with you, Jeff.
A lot of different options. I'd say if I had to pick one, I think an update to the Communications Act, as big a project as that would be an excellent place to start. We come in with a sort of fresh slate with a new administration to take another crack at updating the Communications Act. I think so many of the real challenges around open internet policy all boils down to jurisdiction more than the actual policy themselves and all the baggage that comes along with the jurisdictional framework that the FCC chose of Title II. And so if we can get an update to the Communication Act that sort of updates the jurisdictional framework, clarifies roles of FCC and FTC, for example, would be a great benefit for policy, not just open internet, but things like privacy and other issues like that. I think an update to the Communications Act would be the first place to start, yeah.
Thank you. Brett?
Yeah, so that's a very good practical piece of advice from Doug. And I know there was things mentioned at the keynotes that obviously matter, whether it's 5G or tower siting and things like that, obviously. But, so I won't repeat those, but they all matter. I guess what I would say is I think it's important for the perspective that comes into this landscape to realize the kind of big changes that are happening and to understand that that the networks are part of the internet. They're not different from the internet. And that the way that the regulators and policymakers should look through the consumer's eyes. Look at how they understand these things. For example, an issue like privacy or something like that. They don't look at who's handling my data. They care about what data is being handled and what are you doing with it. Is it my healthcare data? I want to know it's protected. So I think one thing I would say is just bringing this realism perspective to that the world has fundamentally changed. Communications landscape has fundamentally changed, and and ideally we'd update the Communications Act to reflect that. But even as we move to that point, I think we can all at least agree on bringing that perspective to whatever act we're dealing with now and later. I think that's very critical and very important so that we see things through the consumer's eyes.
It's been one of the hallmarks of this entire meeting, and the chairman spent a good deal of time on it this morning, but 5G, obviously, this administration, this commission has done an enormous amount so far to get us on the way to deploying and developing 5G. And I think for the next administration, we've got to continue that path. We've got to continue to remove the barriers to deployment and help facilitate the increased development deployment of small cells and of all the architecture that we need to really bring 5G forward. And I think that's going to be a continuing process throughout the next administration.
John?
Let me build on that last point. I'll just talk about spectrum policy. So at a high level, I think spectrum policy remains one of these maybe dwindling issues in Washington where there's a genuine kind of bipartisan, it's good, and has a lot of aspects to that. But I think outside of, folks in this room and sort of the small set of folks that really are deep in that policy area, the true focus in the administration, and the FCC, we're independent, but I think in the federal spectrum coordination world, we work closely every day with NTIA and other parts of the federal government. The laser-like focus that really, I think, does start with the White House back in 2009 on spectrum really has made a difference. I think, if you look at the relative volume of spectrum in auctions 8-9 years ago relative to what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, it's pretty stark. I would say as I've come into the Wireless Bureau, I've been really just truly impressed at the genuine, at the personal level, collaborative intent from all the federal agencies, and NTIA plays a huge role, and DoD. There really is a desire to figure out how to do these things better, especially in the 5G context. And that won't just happen automatically. No matter what the next president thinks about spectrum, if he or she thinks about it at all, it takes more than that to say, yes, we want to maintain this focus. I just would really underscore that because the federal commercial collaboration and sharing is a big deal, and it's really hard. And without those reinforcements from the top, it's just not going to happen on its own. The other quick spectrum policy thing I would just push on is, spectrum policy innovation really has been a hallmark of the U.S. government going back 20 plus years, and it has made a huge difference. And we have to continue to do that and not just kind of settle back into camps that sort of support certain things about the status quo. I was talking to a friend of mine that was involved in the very, very early spectrum auctions in the 90s. And, some of the folks here I'm sure were involved in all this then. But at the time, right, the idea of auctioning spectrum, crazy, what are we doing? Unlicensed rules, that they were, actually the FCC folks at the time were like, I hope this works. And there was genuinely this, boy, I don't know. And now we treat those two things as just absolute true north, right? Spectrum policy, whatever else, you support auctions and you think, unlicensed and licensed is the right balance. And I just think looking forward in this world of more and more need for sharing and much more complex solutions to spectrum problems, the openness around trying new approaches is really important. And so, the 3.5 gigahertz model that we rolled out over the summer, it's new, has some new things to it. We're going to work with folks to get it right. But being open to continuing to innovate in spectrum policy, I think is really important. Again, going back to the 5G imperative, because, it's not just going to happen on its own. We really have to kind of collectively commit to it, government and industry.
Well, I'd like to give a big thank you to our panelists today. What a great and thoughtful discussion. Thank you so much.